Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Monica Malampalli, Healthy Women Senior Advisor for Scientific and Strategic Initiatives. I'm delighted to welcome you to our first session for the value of biosimilars in women's health, three-part roundtable series. Today, our focus is on women need to know about biosimilars as the latest treatment option. In 2019, Healthy Women held a one-day forum introducing the concept of biosimilars means to women's health. The key takeaway was that biosimilars have a significant potential to increase women's access to affordable life-saving drugs, but barriers still exist when it comes to access and uptake. Among the most notable barriers are lack of patient and provider education. In fact, a Healthy Women survey found that 70% of women don't understand biosimilars. To help close the knowledge gap, we have gathered diverse experts for what I know will be a robust discussions on innovations in biosimilars, overcoming challenges and barriers, and what women need to know about the latest treatment options. For more than 30 years, Healthy Women has remained true to its founding mission. From the start, we've been committed to creating and broadly disseminating evidence-based and clinically sound health resources, tailored for the unique and often overlooked health experiences of women aged 35 to 64. I want to thank Amgen and Viatris for their support in helping us bring this important topic to life. I invite you to visit healthywomen.org to learn more, and I hope you will consider joining us for another session in this roundtable series. Now, I'm thrilled to welcome our esteemed panel of experts and today's moderator, Elisa Vitelich. Elisa is the Policy Director at Arthritis Foundation. She advocates for state and federal legislative and regulatory policy to improve care and support patients living with arthritis. Her focus is to raise the visibility of arthritis as a public health priority, build support for federal and state policies that ensure access to affordable, high-quality healthcare, and enhance patient engagement in policymaking process. Thank you all for joining us today. My hope is that you leave feeling more informed and empowered. Now I'll turn it over to Elisa. Thank you, Elisa.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Elisa Vitelich. I'm honored to be your moderator for today's event. And we're really going to spend some time today with our fabulous panelists talking about a couple of questions. What are the recent developments when it comes to biosimilars education among patients? What efforts are being led by our partner organizations to educate consumers about biosimilars? We're also going to spend some time talking about how we can aim to reach a diverse healthcare community so that all consumers are better informed on biosims, and what opportunities are there to inform, can we identify for education and awareness purposes, specifically among women. I am very pleased to welcome our panel today. I will introduce them. You can turn your videos on. Sarah Eikenberry is a Senior Communication Advisor at the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration's Office of Therapeutic Biologics, or Biosimilars, in the Center for Evaluation and Research. She provides communication advice and support to senior leaders and the agency about communicating strategic priorities, initiatives, and educational information about biosimilars and interchangeable products. Next, we have Pam Traxell. Pam serves as the Senior Vice President for ACS CAN, the advocacy affiliate for the American Cancer Society, where she is responsible for helping ACS CAN to develop relationships with companies and individuals that can further help to fight cancer through these dynamic relationships, events, and forums. She's also been integrally involved in helping to establish ACS CAN as a national advocacy organization who influences and shapes public policies at all levels of government, and to represent the voices of all cancer patients and their families. Finally, we have Brooke Abbott. Brooke is a patient thought leader and the founder of Crazy Creole Mommy. Brooke is the co-creator of Crazy Creole Mommy Chronicles and the co-founder of IBDM Moms, which is a resource for moms affected by inflammatory bowel disease. Brooke was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis in 2008, and she continues to advocate for those affected by Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. Brooke often represents the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation and the National Digestive Disease National Coalition on Capitol Hill. Welcome to our panelists. We're very glad to have you here. For our live audience, as a friendly reminder, we encourage you to provide comments, ask questions directly to our panelists in the chat box feature that you'll find in the Zoom link. We're excited to have you here. And with that, let's get started with our panel conversation. Once again, panelists, thank you all for joining us here today. We're going to spend some time today, obviously, talking about biosims, of course, and go in a bit of a round robin style. So feel welcome to respond to any of the questions as you wish. If you feel like you have something you'd like to share, chime in. So to kick things off, Sarah, I know that you have a slide that I believe we can put up here. Hoping that you can help us understand to start, how do we define biosimilars? What are the treatment areas that biosimilars have been approved by the FDA for so far?
Hi, thank you, Elisa. I'm happy to be here and to help explain more about biosimilars to a variety of patient audiences. So this slide is basically just a laundry list of the various FDA-approved biosimilars, and the ones highlighted in the sort of lighter purple color are the ones that we believe are on the market. Because we don't technically track that, we can't guarantee it, but to our best of our knowledge, they're on the market and they treat a variety of illnesses from IBD, so Crohn's and colitis, arthritis, psoriasis, various oncology indications such as lung cancer, colon cancer, breast cancer, and then supportive oncology treatments like filgrastim and pegfilgrastim and others to help you to boost immune support. And so those are the major ones on the market right now. So just to give a little bit of a primer on what a biosimilar is to sort of start us off on our conversation here. So these are the technical terms about biosimilars. A biosimilar product is highly similar and has no clinically meaningful differences from an existing FDA-approved reference product. And so what does that mean? It means that compared to the reference product, the biosimilar is made with the same types of sources and it acts the same way, given the same way. So if you take an injection, you're going to receive an injection from the biosimilar, and has the same potential side effects and has the same benefits and the same strength and dosage. An interchangeable product is one that is biosimilar, but can also be substituted by the pharmacist at the pharmacy. And currently there are no interchangeable products on the market, but I just wanted to give you that definition for the future.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Sarah. So it sounds like we have quite a number of biosimilars and many that are on the market now. So for all of our panelists, please feel free to chime in. But Sarah, maybe we can start with you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how biosimilars connect to women's health. Are there any particular pathways or things that we should keep in mind specifically to women?
Well, I think that a lot of the diseases that like women inordinately suffer from, compared to men, are treated by biological products. Like some of these IBD and arthritis definitely impact women more than men. So I think it's good to know what they are from that angle. But also, women are a lot of times the people who are making the treatment decisions in their home, or pushing for their children's care, or advocating for their husband's care or their significant other's care. So it's important for them to know about biosimilars from that angle as well.
Perfect. Pam, any thoughts how biosims can relate to women's health?
Yeah, so this is really exciting to me. From the cancer perspective, we have 3 reference products that have biosimilars at market now as of 2019. So pretty recent, especially in COVID time, which 2019 was just yesterday, right? So I'm super excited by the fact that right now, for those 3 products, and these are the backbones of oncology care for things like breast cancer and colorectal cancer, so definitely cancers that impact women. We have 10 biosimilars at market, and we have a pipeline of an additional 17 biosimilars that are market for those products. So it's really going to give women a lot of choices. And I think in the cancer space in particular, these are drugs that are oftentimes used in combination with other biologics to treat these cancers. So the idea of having access to a lower cost product to use in combination with another product is just a great way for women to save money to battle their cancer.
Brooke, I don't want to leave you out, but we can definitely move on to our next question unless you have thoughts here.
Just kind of piggybacking off what Pam said, as a patient and as a patient advocate, especially in the chronic disease space, it can become an issue of health disparities and a lot of miscommunication. And also a lot of patients with chronic conditions find themselves in situations financially that they can't even handle anymore when it comes to their medications. So having biosimilars on the market to kind of offset some of the costs of the biologic may actually help a lot of women who are struggling financially or are somehow in issues with healthcare disparities in their communities based on their circumstances.
Mm-hmm. And Brooke, as a patient advocate yourself, for consumers, do you see that there's a need for more education on biosimilars, kind of addressing some of our assumptions or things? Do you find yourself wondering more about biosims? I'd love to know your thoughts on education.
Yeah, for me and for us at IBD Moms, education is so important. When we first started learning about biosimilars, I know for me, I didn't have a lot of education about it. And the idea of being changed without your permission or suddenly changed just because of cost seemed very jarring and very alarming for me and for a lot of patients with chronic conditions because, when you're taking these medications, it is really a lifestyle decision. You need to make that decision with your doctor based on what you have going on with your life, based on the severity of your disease. There's so many factors that you're trying to get in. And so you want to make the best decision possible, and you're going to have to continue to make that decision. So in the IBD space, there were not a lot of drug options for a very long time. And now we have a lot of options coming out, and they're continuing to come out. But having more information about what a biosimilar is, instead of just being told that you can take the generic drug of this biologic, without having those true discussions and having tangible information that you can share with your family, with your other doctors that you may have on your team, and something that you can digest for yourself to make an educated decision on your pathway to remission is so important. I can't stress enough how important it is to have open communication with your healthcare team constantly. Even if you're on a treatment right now that seems to be working, it's important to kind of think of the next step and to start having that conversation about biosimilars versus biologics and why there are so many, why it's so important, and why they would be possibly the best option for you in the future.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I know, Pam, you'll probably talk a little more about the biosimilars principles, but one of the things we were discussing internally was, the need to normalize the concept and the term biosimilars. It can feel really new to patients and therefore can really inhibit their ability to access the inherent fear of something new or a change. Just look at the vaccine world right now, lots of education opportunities. So I hear you on educating the patient, on the concept itself to make it not so scary. It might be an area that we can dive into more.
Yeah, and I would say actually that when I first started working with this in our patient community, I think the one thing that I found was when you say biologic, people don't even know what that means, right? So people were like, well, wait, what's a biosimilar? And I'm like, oh, okay, well, we got to go back to what a biologic is. So, I agree with Brooke, having that communication with your doctor and not, to your point, just resting on, well, this is where I am right now. Like, doesn't matter what happens in the future. Obviously cancer patients are used to having a long conversation about what happens if this therapy doesn't work. But I think making sure that patients understand what their options are and that there are options, I think is really important. I also think too, as patient advocates, we deal a lot with patients who come to our organizations because they can't afford the cost of their treatment, right? And that's what's driving them to potentially become a patient advocate. So being able to talk to people about the fact that biosimilars could represent real savings for them from a cost perspective, particularly if they have a chronic disease, to me is really helpful. It's been great for me to be able to say there is an equally effective, equally safe, low-cost option available to you. Patients really like to hear that. And I think that that's an important education point.
Yeah, we're talking a little about some of the opportunities in the future. What are some of the recent developments that you all have seen on efforts looking to elevate patient education on biosimilars present day? Have you seen anything? They're still relatively new, hitting the market in the US in the last several years, the most recent decade. Any thoughts on the latest and greatest developments?
So
Well,
go ahead.
Sarah.
Well, I was just going to say that up until now, a lot of it's been focused on the physician education aspect, because it was really important for doctors to understand what biosimilars were so they could have that conversation with patients. And it's only been recently that I've really seen any patient materials, or seen many patient materials, I should say, start to come out for them. So I'll turn it over to Brooke and let her talk about it.
Well, I was going to say that I'm actually very grateful to some of the pharmaceutical companies who have engaged a lot of patient advocates. We've been invited to some of these campuses where we've spoken to some of the scientists and gotten real information that we can take back and translate to the patient community. A lot of patients sit on advisory boards where they're able to break down the information, the education packets and pamphlets that go out to patients, so that you're actually speaking with patients, speaking in terms that they will understand and not be so overwhelming. Because a lot of times when you're starting to change treatments, or when you get a new diagnosis, all that information can be super overwhelming. And it feels like a lot of information is coming at you, and you just don't want to sit there and read 5 pages of information on one particular drug. But the engagement I've seen, particularly on Twitter and on Instagram, of companies and HCPs engaging with patient advocates who have an audience of patients. They're following us, they're joining our programs, they're reaching out to us for help. And I feel like there are some bridges that have been fortified during this time. And the education is really getting to the patients through a funnel, a funnel of advocates, which has been really fantastic.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that. I know at the Arthritis Foundation, we've had a bunch of conversations peer-to-peer. Patients want to hear directly from another patient with their specific disease profile about what their experience was like. How did you, kind of transition into this world of biosimilars, and just knowing that there is someone else there to kind of break down some of these word choice barriers or other barriers to access, I think is fascinating. So I think kind of transitioning in specifically, I'd love to know more about what you and your organizations have done related to addressing education. What kind of resources can you share, or have you worked on developing? So I'm not sure if we all have slides, but Pam, maybe we can start with you and we can talk a little about the Biosimilars Principles document.
Sure. So we've done a wide variety of educational efforts. The Cancer Society has information about biosimilars, and we've actually integrated that on our website by disease state. So you can search for biosimilars, but you can also learn about it in terms of what that means in treatment of breast cancer and colon cancer. We've also worked in conjunction actually with the Arthritis Foundation and many other patient advocates around a set of principles, really trying to outline how we're going to educate patients about biosimilars. And I think one of the things that's most important, and I suspect for many audience members on the phone, is there might be some of you, unfortunately, that have multiple conditions that require treatment from a biologic and potentially a biosimilar product. So one of the things that we found is that we needed to all speak as one voice as patients, and patient advocates about what biosimilars are. And it kind of goes back to exactly what Sarah addressed. One of the key things that I think we found is that we all wanted to kind of use the same terminology, and really using the FDA as kind of the guidepost for that. So even though biosimilars are relatively new here in the United States, we can all say that we had produced kind of very early on a lot of information about biosimilars as patient advocates. And we all have kind of made a pledge to go back and really try and hew to what the FDA has put together with their patient and provider information materials, so that if you go to the Arthritis Foundation website and you learn about biosimilars, you come to the Cancer Society website and you learn about biosimilars, that information is going to be consistent. We felt like that was one of the biggest services that we could do for patients, because we know that there are many patients that have multiple diseases, and we don't want there to be any confusion about what biosimilars are.
Perfect. Thank you. Sarah, FDA resources, we heard Pam just say, looking to guidance from the federal government on clarification and consistency on language. What are some of the resources that you can talk about with us?
Yeah, so we have a couple different resources for patients. One of them is an infographic and a dedicated website. We also have an article about what biosimilars are that's for consumers. And we have those also in Spanish, the website, the article, and the infographic. So it's pretty limited at this point. However, we are working on testing and refining and developing new materials as we speak, actually. And so we hope to, have stuff out in the next, I thought it was going to be this year, but it might be next year, given timelines. Yeah, COVID has made like focus group and testing pretty difficult. So even virtually, it's it's interesting, the virtual stuff. But anyways, so we are working on additional materials. But the testing part, I have to say, which isn't necessarily about these resources, it's been so important to talk to actual patients, and it is just it's really helpful because, even as patient advocates that I'm sitting here with today, you start to understand it, and then it sometimes it becomes hard to relate things in a way that other people can understand. So it's a nice, splash of water on the face or whatever when we test something sometimes, and we're like, oh, that doesn't really work. So anyways, we are definitely working on additional resources, but this is a good start, and the website has more information in it as well.
Mm-hmm. I hear you on the reaching out to get, quantitative, qualitative data. Yes. That's really robust. We're trying to always be building more information out so we can get a better understanding, a better idea of where we can focus our efforts and our energies too. Yes. I know the Arthritis Foundation did a study with the goal of better understanding what patients are aware of, what their perceptions of biosims, as well as their interest and motivations to explore biosimilars as a treatment option. And we're really looking to leverage some of those insights from that research to inform specific educational materials and content. As Pam spoke, we're working with a whole coalition of different organizations. But we've really seen patients basically know next to nothing about the biosimilar category, and information really hasn't trickled down to them via their healthcare provider or other resources. And we also know through that research that some of the key questions about biosims revolve around basic understanding of what are they, how might they help, safety and cost. And those are kind of the goals of this panel series that we're doing with healthy women. And just really emphasizing that patients are open to that conversation and discussion with their provider, and making sure that we are providing them with the tools to be able to have that conversation effectively. So I know that there's a lot of work that we can do. It sounds like we have a couple questions from the audience. Monica, I'd love to bring you in to the mix now and see what we have to ask our panelists.
Thanks, Elisa. We do have some questions. So this one, I think it's sort of follows up on what Pam was talking about, but can you help me understand why some biosimilars are not available in disparate therapeutic areas? For example, rituximab equals rituximab is the only biosim for rheumatology setting, while oncology has multiple choices for rituximab. So anyone wants to address
that's a fun question and a good one. It's not the most satisfying answer, so prepare to be dissatisfied. So in the United States and actually other countries, innovator products, so brand new products to market, are given a patent life, right? That's over a period of years. And once their patent expires, biologic products are eligible to have competition. That competition comes in a category of drugs called biosimilars. And so the reason that there isn't more competition is because those drugs are not yet eligible for biosimilar competition. But you'll be pleased to know that every year, different drugs come up for competition, and there will be more biologics, coming to market each and every year. So I think the good news is help is coming, but it's not coming quickly, if that makes any sense. That is kind of a difference that the United States has compared to other countries. So our patent rules are different here than other countries, but this is why I think it's so important to begin educating women about biosimilars, because while you might not, have the opportunity to take a biosimilar now, in future years, you will.
We have one more question. How do you determine if there is a biosimilar therapy for my disease?
So I can take that one. You can actually go to the FDA's Purple Book, and I probably should have put that on the slide. It's Purple Book Search is the website. If you just Google that, you'll find it. But there's a simple search, and actually you can type in the reference product, and it will let you know if there's biosimilars to that product. And you can always, talk to your doctor to see what your options are as well.
Thanks, Sarah. Pam, this one is for you. Can you talk about your cost of cancer report and how biosimilars were shown to impact costs?
Sure. So always happy to talk about our work. So last year, ACSCAN released a wide-ranging study around the cost of cancer and really talking about, how insurance design impacts the cost that an individual cancer patient might pay. One of the examples that we gave was a stage 2 breast cancer patient. So we modeled out her cancer care, and we estimated that between her and her insurer, that cancer would cost her $75,000 over 2 years. But if she was eligible to take a biosimilar as one of her drugs instead of a brand name product, the cost to her and her insurer would decrease by 21%. That's real money, right? Mm-hmm. And this is just at the beginning. I think one of the things too that we need to think about is that competition generally means lower prices. So the more drugs that we have at market, the more biosimilars we have at market, there's a hope, and it's my fondest hope, that those prices will edge down. We just did this study last year in 2020. These products had not even been on market really super long. So, I'm hoping this is data that we're going to continue to refresh over time, but I'm hoping that those costs edge down even more. And I think patients know that any cost savings in battling your disease is money, that you would really want.
Anybody else wants to comment on what Pam just said? Okay, this one, I think there's still some confusion between biosimilar and generic. So one question is, can you describe the difference between biosimilar and generic products?
Yeah, so I can take this one. So the main difference between biosimilar and generics is that they're both regulated under different laws. And that is why you can't, call them the same things, or part of the reason why. Generics are copies, like chemical copies of a medication, whereas biosimilars they can't be exactly copied, but they are almost exact copies of biologic products, which are made from living sources. And so because they're living, they are constantly changing. And this is true with the biologic batch to batch, just as it is with the biosimilar. So That's the main difference, like the fundamental difference, but they're both, they both have the same inherent, meaning, which is to save money and to provide access to patients with lower cost treatment options. And they do that through the market competition that Pam was talking about.
Great. Let me just read out one more question and then we'll move on. Where do you see most biosimilars focused now? In what therapeutic areas? Maybe Sarah, you can answer that.
So there is a robust pipeline of biosimilars in development, but as Pam said, it kind of is dependent upon what's coming off patent as to sort of what is moving up next through the pipeline. So I would say it's, oncology treatments are definitely one of the top areas, because I guess they're also the top area that uses biological products in general. So that would make sense. And I'm sure that there are others coming off patent that will be for other treatment areas in the arthritis and IBD space and nephrology. I guess one of the things to talk about is, and this is another one of these regulatory sort of wonky things that happened, which is what we refer to as the transition. When biologics, when certain biologics were first sort of approved, they came in through that pathway that the generics are kind of under, the law that the generics were under. And so they were, even though they were biologic products, they were approved in that because it was 100 years ago. So that includes insulin and some other hormone therapies and things like that. And so because once the law that created biosimilars was passed, they put this what's called the transition period. So it was like a 10-year period. And then these products would transition to be regulated as a biologic product so that they could have biosimilar competition. And so in the future, there will be biosimilar insulin products, which will also greatly, hopefully, drive down the cost of insulin, because we know that that has just been a huge problem in our country with people being able to afford insulin treatment for diabetes.
Thank you, Sarah. Elisa, I'll hand it over to you back again.
Great.
We have a few more questions, but we'll come back.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Monica. Audience members, remember, please feel free to add your questions and comments in the chat box feature. Monica and I will be collecting all of those, and we'll hope to answer as many as possible. We'll take a couple more Q&A sessions throughout the rest of our questions. So moving on, health equity, diversity in our community are really big topics, in particular over the last year. I'd love to discuss some about how we can aim to reach a diverse healthcare community so our consumers and our patients, providers, the entire community are better informed, particularly about biosimilars. Can each of you share some of the possibilities or initiatives that you think that we can seek in order to achieve this? Brooke, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I'll start.
Perfect.
I think if we're talking to the HCP community, the biggest thing that they can do is engaging their patients, but also engaging patient advocates so that they can connect their patients to a diverse patient community. One of the biggest things that helped me was I had a surgeon who was already kind of talking and engaging with patient advocates. And so he was able to direct me to certain people that shared similar stories with me. And I think that kind of opens up the HCP's idea of different patients in different communities and what is happening within that sub-community of that particular disease space. And if we're talking to patients, find people who share your stories, but also find people who aren't necessarily similar to you. Because when it comes to therapeutic drugs, when you're thinking about creating a treatment plan for yourself, you want to make sure that you're covering all of your bases. You want to make sure that you're getting all the information. And someone who is in your similar situation, that's kind of like going into your own silo, right? And so you're already kind of getting the idea is that you're already getting that that confirmation. But if you go out of your silo a little bit and you kind of reach out to different patients and different patient advocates online, you kind of get a different perspective of how that treatment space and how healthcare is, overall, how it's affecting people overall. So the biggest thing you can do is just kind of venture out and communicate. I'm all about education, communication, and opening up your world a little bit more.
Absolutely. I hear you. Sarah or Pam, any thoughts on how we can engage in a more diverse, community-oriented healthcare space?
I'll start. So, ACS CAN has been actively engaged actually within the oncology space with NCCN, which is the National Cancer Comprehensive Network, and the National Minority Quality Forum, to talk a lot about how we can elevate health equity in communities of color and really identify some of the potential barriers to all patients receiving equitable cancer care. And I think biosimilars can be a big piece of this. We really, and this builds off what Brooke said, we have to talk more about treatment options. We have to make sure that physicians, nurses, patients all know that this is a potential option and that there are lower cost options available for patients. Because I think when we think about health equity, what we want to make sure is that cost doesn't create an additional disparity in outcomes for patients, right? So we talk about disparities all the time. We think about them in traditional ways, which may be race, maybe where you live, might be your sexual orientation, right? But there is another layer of potential health disparities in healthcare, which is really around your ability to pay. And that is a really unfortunate one. So I think really trying to spread the importance of having lower cost options for patients who right now might not be seeking a biologic because they can't afford it, which is to me shocking to say in the United States of America, but there are patients, and I'm sure Brooke knows some, I know some, who are saying, I can't afford that, so I'm not taking that. To really use the fact that we have biosimilars now to go back and say, look, you need to go back to your doctor, you need to have a conversation. Potentially a biosimilar might be a good therapeutic option for you to afford, life improving, and in the case of cancer, life-saving cancer care. So, to me, it's really urgent that people understand that there are options out there now that weren't, until just a very short period of time ago.
Definitely. Brooke? I'm sorry, Sarah.
Yeah, well, I think that Pam and Brooke are really the experts in this area because their organizations are, in touch directly with patients, all over the country. And so they're really have a better understanding of how to reach these patients who might not have access to the information or other resources to even hear about biosimilars. And so at FDA, while we might be developing these materials, we do, we hope to work with organizations, help provide materials to them if they need it, so that, people like Brooke and Pam can get it out to the patients who really need it.
Definitely. And speaking of getting that information out, I know we talked a little about what resources exist and what our respective organizations are doing. I'd love to engage more on leveraging that information. How can we partner together in the community? What are some new opportunities that we can identify for more education and awareness, especially around the issues that are relevant for women? Pam talked about access and affordability. Those are critical. Any thoughts on utilizing the resources that we already have and where we might be able to go with them in the future? Pam, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I think it starts with dialogues like this, to me, and, I know I said this before, but many patients don't even understand what a biologic is, right? I get a shot, I get infused, So the word biosimilar, it's kind of a complicated English word, right? biologic is also complicated too. So, looking for those opportunities to kind of do that peer-to-peer connection. I think that you talked about this, and I think it's really important. Patients want to be able to talk to other patients that have had their experience, right? And because of social media, and I know I mentioned this, Twitter and Facebook, there are all these groups that are really connecting. There are support groups, really being able to have patients be able to say, hey, I just found out that there's this thing called a biosimilar. I talked to my doctor about it. I'm going to give it a try. They post the next time, or they have another meeting and they say, yeah, it's going pretty well. I think that that's really important. I think, social media has really made it interesting. So patients are reaching out and connecting with each other all the time, right? Without patient advocacy groups like mine, and they are connecting, more importantly, globally. So, when I talk to patients, the ones who I actually think know the most about biosimilars are the ones that are involved in global, Facebook groups, right? Who are talking to patients who are like, why do you have all these questions about biosimilars? Because, here in France, we've had them for, however many years. So they kind of find Americans kind of funny that we ask these questions, but I do think it's important to just make sure that there are good sources of information for this dialogue and really have it become more the standard of care. For us in oncology, we're very lucky that the 3 biosimilars that are on market, these are the oncology drugs that most people know. These are the backbones, even if you don't work in cancer. These are drugs you've heard of before. And so the fact that there are now biosimilars available kind of, I think it kind of makes it a little bit easier for our community to better appreciate, what biosimilars could be.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that. I mean, we see and we know patients go online for their resources a lot of times, and it's confusing at best and can sometimes even be a little misleading and hard to know where to go to for certain information, even just in a simple web search. So I love hearing about patients connecting with each other, even in other countries, to see what the potential for the future could look like. Monica, I know we have a couple questions. We have about 15 minutes left, so let's see what our audience is asking.
All right, one of the questions I got was, can nurse practitioners prescribe biosimilars?
It depends on the state that they practice in and whether or not they're allowed to do that under state law.
Thank you. This question is the FDA and CMS aware of the impacts of Pbms on the utilization of biosimilars? Does anyone want to explain what Pbms are? And then,
So I don't know if I'm the right person to exactly explain what Pbms are. They're pharmacy benefit managers. Pam might be able to explain it better than I can, but I am for sure that the FDA and CMS is absolutely aware of the impact that these organizations have on the medicines that are available to patients.
Yeah, and Sarah, I'll build off that. So PBMs are a company that your insurance company or your employer might contract with to manage your access as a patient to a pharmaceutical product. And they have rules about what products you can access, in what order you can access them. They're also in charge of how much your copay or your coinsurance is. So they're kind of important actors. And yes, there are, I think it would be hard for the FDA and CMS to not be aware of that. This is not just specific to biosimilars, however. PBMs regulate how we get all the drugs, right, that you receive from an insurance plan. So.
Right. Alyssa, I will let you continue. We're still getting a lot of questions. We have a really good, engaged audience, but let's come back again. So why don't we move on to the next segment?
Perfect. We will jump in. I promise we will try to answer as many of your questions. We've reserved a little bit of time at the end as well, so hang in there and be sure to continue sending in the Q&A feature if you have questions or comments for our panelists. So moving on, one of our final big questions, panelists, What would be the one thing that you would like to share with our audience that would be the most important regarding the value of biosimilars, especially in women's health? The one thing, I know we have several and there's lots that we've talked about today. As a final send-off piece of information, what do you think is the most important? Sarah?
So from the FDA perspective, we really just want people to know that these products are safe and effective. They are not going to act differently than the reference product, and patients and healthcare providers can rely on them for their treatment.
That's perfect. I think being able to know that we can go to the FDA as a valuable resource is really important there. Yeah. Pam, we'll jump to you next, perhaps.
I hate when Sarah steals my answer. I think that I would say have a conversation with your doctor, right? All medical decisions are made in consultation with your doctor. If your doctor says, I want to try you on this, and they happen to mention it's a biosimilar, which, to be honest, I don't think that they're going to, but let's pretend, they're going to say a drug name to you and you're going to be like, okay, great. What about that? I think ask, and have a discussion about that. If you are on therapy right now, if you have breast cancer right now, going to your doctor and saying, hey, I was on this webinar, I heard this thing about biosimilars. Is there a biosimilar available for me? I think is a smart thing to begin that conversation, because I think, we want to make sure that patients can avail themselves of that option and be an informed consumer, right, to have that conversation.
Yeah, and building, Pam, we talked a lot about the patient-provider conversation. The importance of language and word choice really matters, and how we're communicating not only to advocates and patients, but to providers and to the community at large. And really focusing on that relationship, I think, is critical. Not scaring the patient, making sure it's accessible. Even things like cheaper can appear to be lesser to a lot of patients who don't understand what you're talking about, and are really looking to their provider or their doctor for cues on what this looks like. So, Brooke, I'd love to hear your final passing thought that you'd like to share. What's the most important feature?
Yeah, for us at IBD Moms, we're just excited that women will have the freedom to choose. It will actually create some kind of equity in a healthcare system that is just prevalent with disparities. And like Pam said, especially when it comes to financial status and circumstances, the access to having a new therapy and the opportunity to really choose. That I think when you're a chronic condition, when you live with a chronic condition, your choices seem to be limited sometimes, and the idea that you will have the power to be able to choose your therapy is important.
Yeah, I love that. Putting the importance back in the patient's hands and the ability to choose in that joint decision-making process is really important. I heard a lot of conversation today about effectiveness, safety, insurance coverage, affordability and access, equity issues. These are all really important conversations that we want to encourage our audience members to continue having. Monica, I know we have some other questions that have popped up. We have a little bit of time left, but really want to engage on the importance of continuing to educate around this field of biosimilars. This is not the end of the conversation. It is just a starting place for us. So I know that we're all very nerdy excited to see where this world can go. So Monica, I will pass it back over to you.
I agree, Lisa, and I think this has been really exciting so far. And one of the questions that we have is, are there problems for biosimilars similar to traditional medicines and genetics, where it can be difficult to get a doc to move from the biologic to the biosimilar? And suggestions for patients who are educated enough to ask but run into this response.
I'll try and take a stab at that. I think every doctor is very different, and I think we all know that. I think having a conversation to ask, is there a biosimilar available for me? And then if the doctor says there is, but I don't think you should get it, then I think the question is, you should ask why. If you are not happy with that answer, and I know Brooke, patients that you represent go through a pretty long medical odyssey to find a doctor that they're comfortable with, that they feel is listening to them. That can happen with cancer patients as well. If you feel like you cannot have a dialogue with your doctor about your treatment plan, I would suggest you have the wrong doctor and that you go out and find another doctor, because when you are ill, you need a doctor who is able to listen to your concerns. And if they feel like they don't have time or they aren't able to adequately answer your questions, I would suggest that the biologic biosimilar conversation is probably going to be the least of your worries.
Yeah, I would piggyback off of that. I just want to emphasize that it's okay to change your doctor or to shop around. As your disease evolves, your treatment plan should be evolving as well. As your life progresses, things will change. Your treatment plan should be changing. And if your doctor is not, or your provider is not evolving with you, then it may be time to go. And for the IBD community, I know specifically there are ways of finding new GIs. I know that there's one barrier that a lot of patients have, which is access. And so in your area, you might not have a GI who specializes in IBD. If they're not comfortable with consulting with what they call an IBDologist, that might not be the person for you, and that's okay. Definitely check back with the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. They have a whole extensive list of GIs who specialize in IBD, as well as the AGA. And you can always reach out to IBD moms about that information, because your doctor is supposed to be in it with you. This is a mutual relationship. You guys are supposed to be working together. So if you can't work together, like Pam said, that might not be the physician for you.
Thanks, Brooke. All right, this question, doc time is so limited and each minute is billed. So is this also a barrier to access to biosimilars? They don't want to take the time to explain to a patient as they can get reimbursed. I think this is more of a comment.
Yeah, so we have found that that's been kind of an issue. So what we suggest is going in armed with information. Get your information from the FDA website, from any website or any organization that is talking about biosimilars and biologics. Take that information, download it to your phone, have it handy. If your doctor uses one of those messaging apps, you can always send information before your appointment, and then you can both reference it, or you can email your doctor. But we always suggest going in with a game plan. Every appointment should be a different topic. It shouldn't be the same run-of-the-mill, how are you feeling? And then moving on. Go in with your questions, and be ready to have a conversation and engage with them. Sometimes it can be a little bit of a battle because time is limited. But if your physician has a nurse practitioner or an assistant that you can speak with to voice your concerns with, you can always do that. And if you're not being heard, it's time to move on.
All right, thanks, Brooke. And this will be the last question. I think you've addressed this a bit before, but let's just get a quick response to this again. Is there a location on a website where I can search and bracket by disease for whether there are biosimilars and if they might be appropriate for me?
So I'll start. The Purple Book does not list them by disease, so you can't just go in and type, Crohn's disease and then have it pop back with all of the available treatments. The best place you should start with is probably the group that represents you, your disease area, like the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation and the National Psoriasis Foundation, the Arthritis Foundation, the ASC CAN. I mean, all of that will help provide information about different treatment options. And then once you know what those are, you can go to the Purple Book and you can look at what the drugs are, and then you can link to the labeling and find more detailed information, as much detailed information as you want to find.
Okay. Pam and Brooke?
I mean, to me, I think that that's the best way to do it. Like I mentioned, at the Cancer Society's website, cancer.org, if you have breast cancer, you can actually type in breast cancer, type on treatment options. The biosimilars are listed right there with the branded products. So you'll be able to see it all there in one place. And I think that that's helpful. And I think there'll be more attention to this over time. I mean, to the point of this webinar, we are in still very early days. We're not talking about hundreds of products yet, but we will soon. So, stay tuned.
Yeah, I mean, I think that patients with inflammatory bowel disease and psoriasis and even arthritis kind of know what biologics are available to them. So once you get that information, that's the best way to do it. And, I'll end with this. I really feel like we're not preparing patients for the long haul overall. And unfortunately, it's up to you as a patient to be able to prepare yourself and to educate yourself. And there are the tools and the resources out there. There are so many different programs and foundations and advocates that are out there willing to help. But the person who can help you be as educated as you need to be is you. And that's whether you're a patient or a caregiver. And it takes a little bit of work and it takes a little bit of time. And, I usually make my Monday the day that I'm looking up stuff and, information that I need that pertains to my disease space. But don't get frustrated and don't lose hope, because Pam and Sarah both said there's, medications coming down the pipeline constantly. There's innovation constantly. So if you are having issues with the ones that are on the market, something is coming for you.
Right, thank you. Elisa, do you have any final thoughts?
Yes, I want to thank all of our panelists today for a really great conversation. Thank you to our live audience. I think we've really had an engaging time to really discuss the importance and value of biosimilars, how they pertain and are critical for women's health in particular. It sounds like we're all in a good partnership here, and I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation with you all. Monica?
Thanks, Elisa. And I also want to thank all the panelists. This has been a great, engaging conversation. And more importantly, I also want to thank our audience who could join us here today. And then for those of you who are watching this at a later time, please email your questions to us at biosimilars@healthywomen.org, and we'll get back to you with answers from our panelists. So we'll continue to engage with you on this topic. And finally, I want to thank our sponsors again, Amgen and Viatris, for making this event possible. For more information on biosimilars, I encourage you to visit healthywomen.org for content, as well as, I encourage you to check out our panelists' websites too. We'll also be posting a recording of today's session on our website at healthywomen.org. And again, don't forget to join us for our 2 remaining webinars on March 11th and March 18th to discuss what providers need to know about using biosimilars and innovations in treatments through biosimilars. I hope you will continue to stay connected to our website, newsletters, and social media. And again, thank you for joining us. Goodbye.